The snow had been falling for hours, thick, relentless, muffling every sound like a heavy blanket over the world. Lena pressed her forehead against the icy window of the abandoned cabin and tried not to cry again. It had been 3 days since her phone had died. 4 since her car had vanished beneath a drift of white somewhere off the forest road. And 5 since she'd seen another human being. She was 16, small for her age, and the kind of quiet that made people forget she was there. Before the blizzard, that quiet had been her shield. Now it was a prison. The wind moaned through cracks in the walls. She wrapped her arms around herself, sitting close to the tiny fire she'd built from broken furniture and strips of curtain. The smoke stung her eyes. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. A single granola bar split into 2 halves, she forced herself to chew slowly. Her mother had always said she was too soft-hearted to survive alone. "You'd stop to feed a stray before feeding yourself," she used to say, half proud, half worried. Now, in the silent wasteland outside, Lena wished for any sign of life. Even a bird would have been a miracle. Then she heard it. So faint she thought it was the wind at first. A low, broken sound. A whimper. She froze. Another whimper, closer this time. It was coming from beyond the cabin door. Heart pounding, Lena grabbed the metal rod she'd been using to stir the fire and crept to the door. The sound came again. Weak, pleading. She pushed the door open, and the cold slammed into her lungs. The world outside was endless white. Snow came down in swirling sheets, thick enough to blur the line between sky and ground. She squinted into the storm, and then she saw it, a shape half buried in the drift, brown fur matted with ice, a paw twitching feebly. It was a dog, a big one. Lena stumbled forward, snow up to her knees until she reached it. The animal was barely breathing. She could see its ribs, the frost crusted around its muzzle. Its eyes fluttered open, dark, desperate but alive. "Oh, God," she whispered, dropping to her knees. Hey, it's okay!" The dog's ears twitched at her voice. Its tail moved once, a tiny flick. She didn't think. She just acted, digging at the snow with her bare hands until her fingers went numb. She brushed the snow from its body, trying not to cry when she saw the deep gash across its shoulder. "Come on," she murmured. "Come inside with me, please." The dog didn't move. It was too weak. So Lena did something she would later wonder how she had had the strength for. She hooked her arms under its chest and heaved. The animal was heavy, at least 70 pounds, and her arms screamed from the effort. But step by step, breath by breath, she dragged it through the snow and into the cabin. The warmth inside was pitiful, but it was something. She laid the dog beside the fire and wrapped it in the old blanket she'd been sleeping under. Its breathing was shallow, eyes half closed. She tore a strip from her sleeve and dabbed at the wound with melted snow water, whispering the whole time, "You're going to be okay. You're okay." For a long while, the only sound was the wind and her own trembling voice. Then slowly the dog's chest began to rise and fall more evenly. Lena smiled through her tears. "That's it. Stay with me." When she finally sat back, exhausted, she realized her own fingers were bleeding from the cold. But for the first time in days, she didn't feel alone. She stared at the animal, the way the light from the fire flickered across its fur. "You're beautiful," she whispered. "You look like a German shepherd, right?" The dog stirred faintly, as if answering. "Okay," she said softly. "You need a name." Her eyes fell on the snowflakes melting on its fur. "How about Frost?" The dog didn't move, but she imagined, just for a moment, that it liked the name. She lay down near the fire, close enough to hear its breathing. The warmth, the faint sound of life beside her, it was enough to make her eyes close. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the cabin, a girl and a dying dog shared the smallest, most fragile spark of hope. And that spark would change everything that came after. When Lena woke the next morning, the cabin was quiet, except for the faint crackle of dying embers. For one disoriented moment, She thought she'd dreamed it all: the snow, the dog, the cold that chewed through her bones. Then she saw him. Frost lay exactly where she'd left him, wrapped in the blanket, his chest rising and falling with shallow but steady breaths. The wound on his shoulder had stopped bleeding. His eyes were half open now, dull but alive. Lena let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Hey," she said softly, crawling closer. "You made it through the night." The dog's ears twitched, and one paw shifted slightly under the blanket. It was such a small motion, but it made her want to cry again. She rummaged through her backpack, what was left of it. A few granola crumbs, a cracked energy bar, a nearly empty water bottle. She looked from the food to the dog, then back again. Her stomach clenched. But the decision came easily. She broke the bar in half and held out the bigger piece. "Here, you need it more than I do." At first, Frost didn't move. Then, with trembling effort, he lifted his head. His nose touched her palm, and he sniffed the food before taking it carefully between his teeth. He chewed weakly, but he ate. Lena smiled through the ache in her chest. "Good boy. You're a fighter." She sat back and watched him for a while. There was something ancient about the sound of the wind outside, the way it howled against the walls like it was trying to erase everything human. She wondered how long it would take for the world to forget her if she did not make it out. She reached out slowly, letting her fingers brush against Frost's fur. It was coarse, still cold beneath the surface, but she felt warmth returning. "I guess we're both strays now," she whispered. Over the next 2 days, the storm eased, though the world outside stayed frozen and white. The firewood was running low, and Lena knew she couldn't stay in the cabin much longer. She'd found a map in a drawer, old, faded, but it showed a ranger station somewhere to the east, maybe 10 or 12 miles away. It was a long shot, but it was the only one she had. She spent hours sitting by the fire, staring at Frost. He was stronger now, able to sit up, to lap water from a metal bowl she'd found. His eyes followed her everywhere she went, dark and intelligent. "You think we can make it?" she asked one afternoon, showing him the map. "If we go east, maybe we'll find people, food, a radio." Frost tilted his head and she laughed weakly. "Yeah, that's what I thought. It's crazy." Still, when she tied her boots the next morning and wrapped her scarf around her face, the dog was already on his feet, limping slightly, but standing. "You sure?" she asked. "You don't have to—" He nudged her hand with his nose, insistent. "Okay," she said, her voice trembling. "Then we go together." The world outside was cruel in its beauty, miles of snow-covered trees and frozen silence. The air burned her lungs with every breath. Frost walked beside her, his fur thick and shining again, leaving twin tracks in the untouched snow. They moved slowly, stopping often. Lena used a fallen branch as a walking stick, and every few minutes she checked the map she barely understood. Hours passed. The sun slid lower behind the clouds, a pale smear of light. By mid-afternoon, the wind picked up again. Snow began to fall, soft at first, then harder, until visibility shrank to a few feet. Panic tightened her chest. "Frost!" she called, reaching out blindly. "Where are you?" A bark cut through the storm, sharp, commanding. She turned toward it and saw his shape bounding toward her, fur dusted with white. He stopped in front of her, tail wagging once, and turned his head as if to say, "Follow me." She did. They stumbled through the snow until Frost stopped again, barking at something ahead. Lena squinted through the wind, and her heart leapt. A cabin. Smaller than the last one, half buried but real. By the time they reached it, she was shaking so hard she could barely grip the handle. The door was frozen shut, but Frost threw himself against it again and again until it cracked open. They tumbled inside in a flurry of snow and exhaustion. Lena collapsed to her knees, gasping. Frost circled once, then pressed against her side, his body hot with life. "Good boy," she whispered, burying her face in his fur. "You saved us." That night, they huddled together near the fire she built from rotting shelves. Frost's head rested on her lap, his eyes half closed. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, for the first time, she didn't feel like the world was trying to erase her. "Mom used to say people need people," she murmured. "But maybe we just need someone who won't leave." The dog's tail thumped once against the floor. Lena smiled, stroking his fur until she drifted off to sleep. Neither of them knew what the next morning would bring, or how much colder the world would get before it offered mercy. But that night, in the little cabin swallowed by snow, the fire between them burned bright enough to keep them both alive. The next few days blurred together, cold, hunger, and the endless white silence. Lena had stopped feeling her fingertips hours ago. Every breath burned her throat. They'd left the second cabin 2 days earlier, hoping to find the ranger station before their luck ran out. But now, trudging through waist-deep snow, she wasn't sure if they were even moving in the right direction anymore. Her boots were soaked through. The map had torn in half. The last of her food was gone. Frost walked ahead, nose to the ground, his limp almost gone. He seemed tireless, driven by some instinct that refused to die. Sometimes he'd stop and look back at her, his dark eyes filled with something she could only describe as concern. "I'm okay," she'd say, though her voice was weak. "Keep going." But she wasn't okay. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Her body felt like it was burning from the inside, her stomach hollow. The wind had a voice now, a cruel whisper that told her to lie down, to rest, to let it all fade into white. That voice grew louder with each step. Around noon, the snow eased a little, revealing a line of trees that looked different, taller, thicker, darker. Lena's heart lifted. "Frost, look! The forest!" He barked once, tail rising, and they quickened their pace. When they reached the trees, the wind dropped suddenly, replaced by eerie stillness. The air smelled of pine and ice, and somewhere nearby, something else. Frost stiffened, ears pricked. A low growl rumbled from his chest. "What is it?" Lena whispered. The answer came a heartbeat later, a crack of branches, heavy movement through the snow. Lena's pulse spiked. She turned slowly and saw it, a deer, small and thin, but alive. It stared at them for one frozen second before bolting deeper into the forest. Frost lunged forward. "Wait!" she cried, but he was gone, disappearing between the trees. "Frost!" Her voice echoed uselessly. Panic surged. She stumbled after him, heart hammering, calling his name over and over. The snow grew deeper, branches clawing at her face. Finally, after what felt like forever, she heard barking, fierce, wild, desperate. "Frost!" She pushed through a thicket and stopped. The dog stood over the fallen deer, panting. The animal was still, its neck broken. Frost looked up at her, muzzle flecked with blood, eyes wide and uncertain, as if asking for forgiveness. Lena's breath caught. For a long time she just stood there, staring at the lifeless creature. Then, slowly, the truth sank in. This was food, the only food they'd seen in days. Her hands shook as she knelt beside Frost. "It's okay," she whispered. "You did what you had to do." Tears blurred her vision, but her survival instinct finally won. With trembling fingers, she pulled her pocket knife from her coat. She'd never done anything like this before, but she forced herself to move, to cut, to take what they needed. It was horrible. It was necessary. When it was over, she built a small fire in the shelter of the trees and cooked a few scraps of meat on a flat rock. The smell made her dizzy. She gave Frost the largest portion, watching as he ate hungrily. When he was done, he came to her and rested his head on her knee, licking the tears from her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." But Frost didn't need apologies. He'd done what instinct demanded. That night, they found shelter under a fallen tree. The snow outside had stopped, and for the first time in days, the stars were visible. Cold, bright, infinite. Lena lay against Frost's side, listening to his heartbeat. "I used to think the world was cruel," she murmured. But maybe it's just honest. It takes everything away until you remember what really matters. Frost's tail moved once. She smiled faintly. You matter. The next morning she woke to the sound of movement. Faint, distant. Voices. She sat up so fast her vision spun. Frost! He was already alert, ears forward, tail stiff. The sound was coming from the east. Men shouting, the hum of an engine, the mechanical whine of something cutting through snow. People, she breathed. We found them. Her legs felt weak as she stood. Come on, boy, let's go. They followed the sound through the trees until the forest thinned. And there it was. A snowcat vehicle, orange and black, parked beside a wooden tower with a satellite dish. A man in a parka stood near the door, holding a radio. Lena's throat tightened. She stumbled forward, waving her arms. Help, please! The man turned. His eyes widened. Hey, over here! Voices shouted. Boots pounded through the snow. 2 more rescuers ran toward her. Lena's knees buckled, but strong hands caught her before she fell. Easy, kid. You're safe now. She turned, searching for Frost, but he wasn't beside her. Wait, she gasped. My dog, where's Frost? The rescuers looked at each other. One of them turned and called out, Nothing back there but trees. Lena's chest seized. She pulled free, stumbling back toward the forest. No, he's here! He was right here! She called his name again and again, voice breaking. Frost! Only the wind answered. Finally, one of the men caught her shoulders gently. We'll look for him, I promise, but you need to come inside. You're hypothermic. She wanted to fight, to keep searching, but her body gave out. Darkness closed around her as they carried her inside. The last thing she remembered before the world went black was the sound of a distant howl, low and mournful, fading into the white. When Lena opened her eyes, the world was warm. For a long moment she couldn't remember where she was. The light above her was soft and yellow, and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic. A steady beeping filled her ears. Then she realized she was lying in a hospital bed. Her throat was dry. Her lips cracked when she tried to speak. Frost. A woman in a red parka leaned over her, smiling gently. Hey there, sweetheart. You're safe. You've been out for a day and a half. Lena blinked. Where? Where's Frost? The woman's expression softened. The rescuers said they didn't find anyone else with you. Just paw prints that stopped near the tree line. Lena's chest tightened. No, he was right there. He saved me. I know, the woman said quietly. Sometimes animals wander off after the rescue teams arrive. They get scared. Lena turned her face toward the window. Outside, beyond the frosted glass, snow still fell in slow, lazy flakes. Her eyes blurred. He wouldn't leave me. The woman hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket. The rangers found this near where they picked you up. She held out a piece of fabric, part of Lena's blanket, torn and frayed with a few coarse strands of brown-black fur caught in the weave. Lena took it with trembling hands, pressing it to her chest. The days passed in a quiet haze. The nurses said she was lucky, mild frostbite, dehydration, malnutrition, but nothing permanent. Her story spread through the small mountain town like wildfire. A lost girl survives a blizzard for nearly 2 weeks. No one believed the details about the dog at first. They said hallucinations were common in extreme cold. That loneliness could conjure anything. But Lena remembered everything. The weight of him against her side, the warmth of his fur, the way his breath fogged in the firelight. He had been real. When she was strong enough to walk, she asked to go back to the ranger station. The rescuers tried to talk her out of it, but she wouldn't listen. The forest was silent when she returned, except for the crunch of snow beneath her boots. She followed the trail she and Frost had taken, her heart pounding in her chest. At the edge of the trees, she stopped. There, half buried in the snow, was a shape, a small mound. She knelt and brushed it away with her hands. Underneath lay the remnants of a collar. old, cracked leather, with a metal tag so worn she could barely make out the engraving. She wiped it clean. Frost, 2018-2023. The numbers hit her like a punch. Her mind spun. That was 2 years ago. She sank to her knees, shaking. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible!" But deep down, something in her already knew. She remembered the first time she'd seen him, half buried in snow, barely breathing. Remembered how no steam had come from his muzzle in those first moments. How she'd never actually heard his footsteps crunch until later, after the fire had burned warm again. The truth crept in like the cold. He had come to her when she needed him most. Maybe he had died out there long before she arrived. Maybe he had been waiting for someone to help him one last time. And in saving him, she had saved herself. Lena lifted the collar to her chest and closed her eyes. The forest was utterly still. Then, faintly, from somewhere beyond the ridge, she heard it. A single, haunting howl. Her breath caught. It was the same sound that had carried her through the storm, the sound she'd heard before the world went dark. It rose and fell like a promise, then faded into silence. Tears rolled down her cheeks, hot against the cold air. "Goodbye, Frost," she whispered. "Thank you." Spring came late that year. When the snow finally melted, Lena returned to the cabin where it had all begun. The roof had caved in, the fire pit gone cold, but she still found the old blanket in the corner. She folded it carefully and placed Frost's collar on top. She didn't stay long, just long enough to light a single candle and leave it burning in the window. An old habit her mother had taught her. Light for the lost, warmth for the gone. As she walked back toward the road, she looked up and saw a single figure standing at the edge of the trees, a German shepherd, strong and golden in the sunlight. Her heart stopped. He stood still for a moment, watching her. Then he turned, tail swishing once, and bounded into the forest until he disappeared between the pines. Lena smiled through her tears. Some part of her knew he would always be there, in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, in the sound of wind through the snow, in the courage that now lived inside her. When people later asked how she survived, she'd only smile and say, "I wasn't alone." Epilogue. A year later, Lena volunteered with the local rescue team. She'd grown stronger, quieter still, but in a different way. The mountains no longer frightened her. One afternoon, while hiking near the ridge where she'd been found, she saw a trail of paw prints in fresh snow. They led into the trees and stopped at a clearing where sunlight broke through the branches. In the center, half buried, was a single paw print, larger than the others, perfectly shaped, untouched by wind. She knelt beside it and smiled. "Still watching, huh?" she whispered. And for a moment, in the stillness of the mountains, she swore she heard the faint, familiar sound of a tail thumping in the snow. The end.